teenagers are the parents who can remember what it was like to be a teenager and go, oh, yeah, that's really awkward, and that was hard when I was asking out people for a date or whatever. And the parents who struggle the most are the ones who really kind of lost track of what it was like to be a teenager, and they make these really high, oftentimes unreasonable expectations and demands on their teens, and then there's all kinds of conflict because the teens are pushing back.
Tim, have you been eavesdropping at my house?
No, I've just been living in my own, so...
Yeah, with two teenage boys here, both of whom I swear are going to become attorneys one day because they're very good arguers. But I learned a while ago with my younger one, when he first hit his teens, that you don't just make these sort of arbitrary rules about things, that you really want to have a conversation with them. And I really see with my son, who's a junior in high school right now, that the next year is kind of his internship before he heads out and heads into the real world, and he's going to probably take some falls that I don't want him to take in the next year, but he'll do it sort of in a safe environment. It's a little less scary than when he goes off to college. So I'm definitely going to be employing some of your principles. Now, I'm very interested in your thoughts on the connection between mind-body issues and sort of training ourselves physically so that we can, be effective mental leaders. Say a little bit more about sort of the physical discipline side of that.
Yeah, a couple different perspectives. I mean, certainly one is the whole notion that 80% of the message is communicated by the nonverbals, and so there's a physical discipline that needs to go along with how can I be present to somebody and not simply the mistake that I see many leaders make is that I already know the answer, I know what this person is going to say, so I don't need to listen to them. And to be able to, as a Catholic servant leader, hold an open space of curiosity and compassion, but not completely caving into what the person's saying is very much a struggle.
Interesting.
The other piece,
go ahead.
Yeah. No. And then the other piece that becomes really important is that we have, as Catholics, we have this great, tremendous legacy of role models in all of the wonderful saints that have existed throughout the ages. And the saints have left us some really great writings that say it's great to be peaceful. St. Francis of Assisi says, preach the gospel all times, but use all words only when necessary. And things like that becomes really important, but the saints gave us the what, be peaceful, but they didn't always give us the how.
Mm-hmm.
So how, because I'll read those things and I'll go, well, how do I do that? I don't know.
Yeah, they didn't deal with some of the issues that we deal with in our
That's right, and they didn't have to deal with all the kind of the modern day pressures and headaches that we're dealing with in 2009 here. So what I found is that embodied practices like the martial arts, like Aikido, really, again, can bring in a little bit more diversity in terms of offering some perspectives of how can I physically hold myself in a way that is more peaceful, that is more life-giving, that is more loving as a Catholic servant leader.
Well, as we enter a new year, I think reading a book like yours is just going to be a great way to start out for so many of us. And again, I want to direct everybody over to CatholicServantLeader.com, and we'll have links to Tim's website and all the places where you listen to this show. But are you one who does like resolutions at the start of a new year?
I tend to keep my resolutions flexible. I'm not a person who writes in stone and says, I'm going to do this, because what I find is that by July, the whole year looks really different because my kids are in a different space or my wife's in a different space, and that resolution doesn't make sense necessarily in July. So I want to be soft about it. Yeah.
Well,
Which again, I think is a big part of Catholic servant leadership is building in that flexibility so that I don't get too rigid or stuck in one place.
If somebody, though, if all this notion is really new to them and everything that you're talking about is sort of revolutionary for some of our listeners, what are one or two things that you think concretely people could do to start off the new year using some of the principles that you teach in your writings and in your speaking? Maybe just one or two kind of key things that would be something they could try out as we start a new year.
Yes. I would suggest two questions that people might ask themselves through 2009 or in the beginning of 2009 at least. And the first question is, how can I listen to others even more deeply? How can I listen to others even more deeply? Because being an effective Catholic servant leader is about being a good listener. And the mistake that often gets made in our culture is that if I'm listening, I'm not really doing anything. I'm just kind of waiting my turn to talk.
Right.
which is really, really, really counter to Catholic servant leadership, is that listening is an active, engaged process. It's as active as speaking. And so if people can kind of hold the question and ask themselves the question, what might I do in January, February of 2009 to become an even better listener, is one simple, easy step that they can use to make themselves even better Catholic servant leaders.
Okay, and what's number 2? Because I'm taking notes. I need to do these.
Yeah. Yes. The other piece is beginning to develop what I'll talk about as a body awareness. Because, again, as effective leaders, we need to know what's happening for ourselves physically, because our bodies are where we carry emotions, and emotional intelligence is very important for Catholic servant leaders. So the second question that I would have people ask themselves is that when I'm leading people, and whether that's being a parent or a volunteer coordinator or leading a Fortune 500 company, when I'm leading people, what's one thing I notice about my body when I'm in conflict, when I'm getting along with people, when things are going well, when things are going poorly? To just begin to pay attention to what do I notice in my body that's happening.
Interesting. And that's so not necessarily when we're talking about body awareness in a worldly sense, the way that people might look at you and say, okay, this year I want to weigh, 10 pounds less, or I want to be able to run my mile 10 seconds quicker or something like that, but more of a spiritual connection to our bodies and the way we react physically to things.
Absolutely, yes. Catholic servant leadership, yes, is not about running the mile even faster or losing 15 pounds, but it's really much more about tapping into the wisdom that God has really embedded in our bodies, that each of us have, that our culture has really taught us to kind of ignore and not pay attention to.
Well, I need more time with you, Mr. Warneka, throughout the course of the year. I hope we can have you back on at a future opportunity to talk a little bit more about your work. And I'm going to be, in the meantime, studying some of your principles and trying to employ them in my own life, because I have a great need for both of the things that you've just mentioned and all the things that I found in your book. So, Tim, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach you in terms of if they'd like to have you out for a speaking opportunity or just to kind of do a little bit more coaching from you?
Absolutely. You can get a lot of information from my website, CatholicServantLeader.com. They can email me at tim@CatholicServantLeader.com, or they can reach me by phone at 440-944-4746.
Great. Well, I hope that you won't mind if we share that phone number, and I want everybody to know that we'll have links and to all of Tim's contact and information and everything in our show notes. So I really appreciate your time and your effort in writing this great book and in the great work that you're doing for our church and for our families.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. It's been wonderful to talk with you.
Great. Well, hopefully it's just the first of many conversations.
Amen. Absolutely. I look forward to it.
Thanks. Well, I want to say thank you again to Tim Warneka for taking the time to speak with me about his book and the great work that he's doing. And I want to invite you to head over to his website at CatholicServantLeader.com for lots of great information.